he's always checking if the sound is good. I'm gonna tell him. Okay, so we should be live now. Okay, hello Ilona, welcome to the channel.
Hi, Leonardo.
Allora, so I've been just to introduce a little bit the reason why we're doing this. So almost, I mean, what, 3-4 years ago, I started to study ancient Egypt on my own as an amateur, and first the history, and then I deep dive into architecture because it's my, I'm an architect, so that's what I'm most fascinated about. But I'm fascinated about a lot of stuff, and I wanted to create a YouTube channel, but not to be like a huge YouTube channel. I just wanted to, because I studied ancient Egyptian architecture, and then if I didn't create a YouTube channel, I will procrastinate, and so I use it as a tool to actually force myself to study, So now it's been almost 100 videos. So yeah, I've been studying the very first tombs of the first dynasty to the pyramid of Khufu, and then let's see later what I will do. Yeah, Marzio says the audio is good. Okay, so we can go. Okay.
Great.
Let me introduce you maybe first, right? Okay, so doctor, right? Dr. Ilona Regulski. Okay. She's a Belgian Egyptologist, which means she studied Egypt quite a lot, and is a research associate at the Egyptian Museum of Berlin, right? And especially in the papyrus collection, which is something we're gonna talk about. You are also the curator, one of the curators for the Egyptian and Sudan collection, right?
Yes, more so than for the papyrus collection, actually. I was working on the papyrus collection.
Okay, give me a second. Okay, give me a second. We have a technical latency. Okay, now it should work better. Okay, sorry. We had a moment of lack of internet, so now it should be working fine. Okay. So you were saying you're more into the Egyptian and Sudan collection now, right?
Yes.
Okay. And
What's the papyrus collection?
okay. Allora, sorry for my internet. I don't know what's going on now. It's a little annoying. If we can solve this internet problem, maybe it's mine. Probably. Let me take my camera out, so maybe it works better.
I will also close my things.
Yeah, if you
but
could,
it shouldn't be. I'm not on the Wi-Fi. I'm on the normal internet here, so it should be okay. Yeah.
Okay. My internet is very good now, so I'm doing the speed test, so it should be working fine. I don't know why. Vabbè. Let's see. Let's see if we. Maybe you wanna try to refresh. Now I see you very well. Okay, cool. Okay, let's go like this, and it's working. Okay. So, Ilona, you've been also a curator of the British Museum, right?
Yes, I was a curator in the Egyptian department at the British Museum for 10 years.
That's why I wanted to ask you, what is a day in the life of Ilona Regulski back then and also now? Like.
Okay. Where do you want me to start? No. So
what does it mean to
yeah,
be a curator? Not
yeah.
everybody knows.
So it's very varied. The days are I wouldn't say unpredictable, but you do many different things. So basically, the role of a curator is to take care of a part of the collection, to do research, to take care of it, to make sure that it's available to the public, to other scholars, to colleagues, and then everything around that. So, for example, one day I will be doing some research on the collection, perhaps in preparation for a lecture. That is what I'm doing today, for example. I'm preparing two lectures. Other times I would be preparing maybe for an exhibition, or I would be actually in the museum giving a tour, or I would be looking at a group of objects in preparation for a visit by a scholar to see that all the objects the scholar wants to study are where they are supposed to be and whether they are accessible, and if they're not accessible, what we have to do with, of course, in collaboration with conservators and collection managers to make sure that by the time the scholar arrives, the objects are accessible. We also get a lot of questions from other colleagues and from members of the public about our collection. And if it's at all possible, if the questions are to the extent that we can answer them, we answer them. So it's very different from day to day. Sometimes we also spend longer periods of time in Egypt on excavation. But I would say that I spent most of my time nowadays, more recently, I spent most of my days working on the collection. Our collection is administered by a large database that also, of course, has to be managed. So we have to work on this constantly, updating the information, making sure that the objects are shown with images. Here in Berlin, our database is not yet completely online. So we are sending objects online one by one, which takes a lot of time because you will want to make sure that all the information about the object is correct, that there is a nice image before you send it online. And so that is also an important part of our job. Because it's really important, we are public institutions, that our collection is available. But it is also a lot of work. So there's only, of course, so much we can do in addition to all the other tasks. And so, yeah, that's more or less the main things I'm doing. And it's a question of organizing yourself and making sure that you can combine all those tasks and prioritizing. Sometimes when some last minute thing has to be done, then yeah, you have to prioritize.
And
Yeah.
you feel quite autonomous in this work, or you're really much given the tasks by supervisors or things like that? I don't know.
I feel I can organize my work myself pretty much, yes. Of course, there are certain things that have to be done, but it's quite relaxed, I would say. Nobody's checking when I do things. And of course, sometimes things have to be done. Like we have a big conference at the end of next week. That is not a question when I do this, it has to be done. But yeah, it's a matter of planning. There's, of course, there are these tasks that take a longer time. Like, for example, updating the database. This is a never-ending task. There is no moment where you can say, now this is finished, because by the time you've updated all the information, some new piece of research will be published, and then you have to add that. That is just continuously, and those are the tasks that belong to the core part of your job. And so you work on that. I take a day a week to do certain things. And yeah, then you know that this has to be done. Nobody has to really tell me. It's part of my job description. So I'm just doing that whenever I have time.
And does it happen that sometimes you have a big moment of revelation? Let's say that right, like you have an artifact, and at some point that there comes a new piece of evidence
Yes,
that actually
yes.
that artifact doesn't belong to that time; it belongs to somebody else, or
Yes, this happens regularly, actually, because our collections, it's the same for my colleagues in the British Museum, my colleagues in the Louvre. We inherit these collections. They're massive. And there's always new things to discover, and things that haven't been really looked at properly, or have been read wrongly. Recently I found a piece that was where it was not a royal name, but a name of a person that helps you date the object was read wrong in the past. And so I checked with a few colleagues. I always try to check and to make sure that
Mhm.
there's I'm right in what I'm thinking, because I mean,
Mhm.
it's a bit, Egyptology is a network of colleagues, and you can just
Mhm.
like use each other to
Mhm.
kind of brainstorm sometimes, or to check things. Maybe this person is more up to date about the latest literature, and then I change the date in the database, for example. This won't change world's history, but
Mhm.
these are small pieces of the puzzle that we can add
Mhm.
to the history of
Yeah.
Egypt, to better understanding the history of Egypt. And yes, and then when you do a piece of research, when you're preparing an article, you try to read the text, and then it's of course nice when you go on and you decipher, and step by step you are finding the content, you're familiarizing yourself with the content of the text. It's amazing work, of course, and these are the nice parts of
Mhm.
the life of an Egyptologist. Yeah.
Yeah, if just to because my camera sometimes just go on and off, so I just wanted to make sure that everything works, and it does work. But if you don't see my face, it's because I'm taking out the camera, so it doesn't
Sure.
interrupt your flow.
Hmm.
Um, cool. I have a question. I didn't. So I have a few questions, and I didn't write this specific one in the list of questions. It's spontaneous from now.
Hmm.
So. You know Howard Weiss, you know, when he came to the Great Pyramid, Howard Weiss, right?
Hmm.
He discovered the graffitis of Khufu in the relieving chambers of the king's chamber, right? Um, he wrote in his diary all of the different graffitis, and he also wrote the Horus name of Khufu, which I don't know how to spell. It's something like Mejedu. Ecco. My question is, and I don't know if maybe I mean I don't know if this is very specific maybe. Do you think by the time of Howard Weiss, which is 1865, he would have known the meaning of that graffiti? Because it's quite important as a. I don't
Hmm.
know. I don't know if you like when the Horus name of kings were first translated. I guess I don't know. I think that's the
Whew,
question. Sorry
that
for
is
the
a good.
hard question.
No, that's a good question. 1865 is not, well, is about 40 years after the decipherment of hieroglyphs. So by that time, people would have been able to read royal names, I guess, because royal names were very much part of the efforts of the first decipherment. It's the one thing that Champollion started with.
Mhm.
So the Frenchman Jean-François Champollion, who
Mhm.
deciphered, who we credit with
Mhm.
deciphering hieroglyphs, very much started with royal names because he wanted to use those to establish the chronology of ancient Egypt, amongst other things. He was, of course, interested in many other things, but that was for him a way to get a sense of the history of Egypt, the duration of the history, and he extended also what we knew about the periodization of history of Egypt.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and so he already did a lot of work on that. He also understood that kings had different names,
Okay.
and but his work was, I mean, the work that was published by him at least, and that was also that is reflected in his notes, which gives a bit more information than what he published, was very much done on the basis of cartouches, the cartouches that have only the one name
Mhm.
of the king.
Mhm.
The Horus name is very specific. I think he understood that this was one of the names
Mhm.
of the kings. He knew that
Mhm.
pharaohs were given a new name, for example, when
Mhm.
they took the throne,
Mhm.
when they started, um,
Mhm.
yeah, their job basically.
Mhm.
If I don't think he was able to read all the names of all the kings.
Mhm.
That is something that progressed over the decades afterwards. But by 1865, I think certainly
Mhm.
famous periods like Hufu,
Mhm.
kings like Hufu would have been known
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
those scholars. Of course, the German. Egyptologist Lepsius did a lot of work on writing, and a lot of German scholars after him. So definitely by the end of the 19th century, we would have known. And then the first really large scale excavations in places like Abydos, where we have the earliest royal names, for example, where we have the earliest tombs of the kings of the first and the second dynasty and their predecessors.
Mm-hmm.
By that time, we have a good understanding of the sequence of Horus names. And I mentioned this site because in the what we call the early dynastic period, the kings would use on objects that we found in their tombs the Horus name.
Mm-hmm.
So we, if you work with first dynasty and second dynasty royal material, you actually work with the Horus names of the
Mm-hmm.
king. So definitely by the beginning of the 20th century, we had a good understanding
Mm-hmm.
of of the relationships of these names and how to read them.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, also in 1865, he would have been able to at least recognize the name.
Yeah.
Sometimes maybe if you don't understand hieroglyphs, you can't identify or read
Yeah.
all the individual signs, or you don't know why they read as the way they were read,
Mm-hmm.
but you would be able to recognize the name. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know why I'm asking this, because there is a theory that says that Howard Wise was in a huge debt and had to discover something, come back to Britain with the discovery. So
Ah,
the conspiracy is that he wrote those
okay.
graffitis and claimed to have found that actually the Great Pyramid is attributable to Khufu. This is the conspiracy, and some people are like, no, but he would not have known the name Khufu name perhaps, but the Horus name no, and that's the counter argument. But I don't know, it's too
Yes.
complicated for me to.
Okay. I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know for sure, but definitely it was known
Mm-hmm.
that these pyramids were owned by these kings. This was already known for a long time by the first travelers and the first excavators.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
these were the monuments that were best known. So he would probably have been right in.
Mm-hmm.
He would have done his research
Yeah.
before he
Okay.
went there. Yeah.
Okay. 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 Yeah, yeah. Well, but actually, this is a very important discovery because, of course, we had a feeling that those pyramids were of Khufu, but since he found the graffiti, finally he could put a name there, right, and say, okay, actually, this is the final confirmation, right? Or
Oof.
no?
I'm not so familiar actually with the
Okay.
Great Pyramids of Giza, I have to say. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, by that time
Mm-hmm.
we have so many descriptions
Mm-hmm.
of travelers, but also
Mm-hmm.
of historiographers,
Yeah.
classical historiographers who of course cannot be believed always 100%, but that part of history, probably together with the 18th dynasty or something, was
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're still discovering.
Mm-hmm.
We're still, even for the era of the Great Pyramids, we're still discovering things, of course. But the identifications of these tombs
Mm-hmm.
were pretty much
Yeah.
secure, I would say.
Yeah. It's
But yeah,
the middle. It's like the Middle Ages where uh, where everything gets confused, because I think that when the Bible comes in and people start to believe like that the pyramids were done by the Israelites,
mhm.
or they were done by Joseph as granaries, and everything confuses, right? But before these medieval times, Herodotus knew already that the pyramid was of Khufu and etc. Like it's there is a lot of confusion
Yeah.
between the classical time and the modern time about that.
Yes, especially the pyramids is something that always encourages all kinds of conspiracy theories. Perhaps
Same.
this is perhaps the reason that not many Egyptologists take the pyramids as their topic of research,
Mhm.
because we we also think that there's so many more interesting things to research. And
Okay.
yeah, I think that that dependence on the Bible
Mhm.
is of course reflective of the time. But also for earlier periods, I mean, if you speak about Herodotus, Herodotus was also more than 2,000 years, or yeah, much more than 2,000 years divide. I mean, separated from the pyramids. So he was as far from the pyramids in time than we were from him, so to say.
Mhm,
So,
mhm,
of
mhm,
course, he also depended on the tradition and on what people remembered
sure,
from those days, or
sure.
to tell him, to give him information. So, of course, he was in Egypt. I mean, he was closer to practices that were still very living in those days, but the
Mhm,
pyramids were definitely antiquities for him too.
mhm. Yeah, but okay, yeah, okay. I mean, we have so many topics we have to tackle. I don't want to step into the Great Pyramid because it's already good that we tackle the Great Pyramid, but we're not gonna talk about the Great Pyramid. Don't worry.
Okay.
Uh, so Egyptian language, please. How does I mean I don't I'm not gonna ask you how does it work because it's gonna take 1 year. So the question is, do you speak ancient Egyptian language in a way that in the Old Kingdom they could have understood you?
That is a little bit difficult. Yes, we we are not 100% sure how it was pronounced during the Old Kingdom. So the Egyptian language survives into Coptic, which in a way is still used in the Coptic Church. Was more actively used until the 18th century. After the 18th century, it really becomes something like maybe the Latin that we use in our
Mm-hmm.
churches or something. It's not. It's after. I mean, the 18th century it's difficult to put really a time on
Mm-hmm.
that, but it's a very ceremonial liturgical language.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Already by that time, probably, but um, at a certain point in time, and this is really important to understand. What we know about the language, not the script, is um, ancient Egyptian language was at a certain point in time, and this was a very slow process, written in a Greek alphabet. Um, First in Greek, later it became necessary to better imitate the sounds of the Egyptian language, and some of the sounds could not be written with the Greek letters we had. And so they add 6 letters from the Demotic alphabet, which Demotic is one of the handwritten versions of hieroglyphs that were circulating more or less, or that was used more or less simultaneously with Greek in Egypt. Um, and that becomes a new alphabet, which is basically Greek with those 6 Demotic letters that continues to be used, and that is also used by the Christians then later to write down the Egyptian language, because at a certain point people were still speaking Egyptian, but more and more they were writing Greek, and then later they were writing Arabic. So there is a push at a certain point by Christian monks mainly to start writing down again this Egyptian language that they were speaking, but that not many people were writing anymore. And so they start making these dictionaries, Arabic, Coptic. We refer to this language as Coptic, which is a little bit misleading because it's certainly not the Copts or the Christians who invented this script or this language. It's the ancient Egyptian language in an
In
alphabet,
Greek. In
basically, in a
Greek.
classical alphabet. And this continues to be used. And so that is how we, at that point, know how to pronounce Egyptian language, because that alphabet also writes the vowels,
Mm-hmm.
so the
Mm-hmm.
sounds, not only the consonants.
Mm-hmm.
But the ancient Egyptian writing system does not do that. Um, However, at the time when they started writing this down in this alphabet, we have already 3,000 years of language development behind us. So it's difficult to say that we have the first old Coptic texts from around 100 AD. So by that time, and also earlier, we have Greek annotations of Egyptian texts, so we know how to pronounce them, because the spoken word was very important to
Mm-hmm.
Egyptians. So it was very important to pronounce, certainly in religious and ceremonial contexts, to pronounce the text correctly. And so once you have more Greek circulating in the society, and this already starts in the 8th century BC, but definitely since Alexander the Great takes over Egypt. But at that point, there's already lots of Greeks living in Egypt, so it's not at that moment that they start writing Greek. At that moment, of course, Greek becomes much more important in the administration. But so slowly, Greek is being used more and more to annotate also for example, the ritual texts, because not maybe they had forgotten how to pronounce certain words, so they help by writing
Mm-hmm.
in Greek how to pronounce.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, you understand. I'm speaking about the first centuries BC.
Mm-hmm.
So did people still speak at that time the same with the same pronunciation as 3000 BC? Of course, we don't know.
You could speak clearly with Cleopatra then.
Yeah, for example, it would have been, yes, we would probably, it's easier to reconstruct how Cleopatra was speaking than how King Khufu was
Yeah.
speaking.
Yeah.
There's a massive language development. As we see the development in writing, because that's what we have, we must assume that there was some development in pronunciation as well. But in any case, we have an idea. Yes, we have an idea. And we as Egyptologists, we use the consonants, and then for the sake of
Mm-hmm.
conveniency, we put an E in between.
Mm-hmm.
So we just put E everywhere, so that also when we're practicing, when we're teaching
Mm-hmm.
or in school, like when we're learning, we put just to be able to pronounce it.
Yeah. For example, the name Kazakhem, we don't know if it
Yeah.
was Kazakhem. We know it was something like that, right? Or I don't know.
Yes, although the A, sometimes we have the A written
Ka.
because for them is the A was not a vowel necessarily. It was like something like a semi-vowel. So we actually have two A sounds. Ui is also, it's an ending of a word
Mm-hmm.
that we probably know was like that. So Khasehemui is perhaps not the best example, but if we take, for example, the word netcher,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
we have the N, the Ch, and the R, which is netcher means God.
Mm-hmm.
In Coptic, it's pnute. So you have the P is the article, which comes in. Egyptians start writing the article in the course of their history. In the Coptic period, or in Coptic you have the article. So pnute. So if you leave the article out, you have
Nute.
nute. So
Nature.
nute comes from netcher. So should we say nucher instead of netcher?
Mm-hmm.
That is the discussion really. Yeah,
Okay. Okay. Well. Okay. We're pretty close.
but we're
Okay.
close. We're close.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
I would say.
Because there is this movie. I don't know if you watched Stargate. It's a movie of
I
1994.
know about it. Yes.
I love it, and there is this guy that starts to learn the language, the local language, and I love the movie. Actually, I have the little thing here. Anyway,
Mhm.
very cool, very cool. Papyrus of Turin. Allora, I've been to Turin to the Egyptian Museum,
Mhm.
and I was looking for, and I found the fragments of the famous so-called famous papyrus of Turin, which Turin has many papyruses, obviously, right? But this one
Yes.
in specific is the one that lists the kings before the pre-dynastic kings and even earlier. My question to you. Allora, first of all, how can we reconstruct from few little because online, if I look online, is I search papyrus of Turin, I see just
Mhm.
little fragments, and I wonder like how in the world they could reconstruct the whole thing from those fragments. That's the first question. But the second question is, what do you make of these very early old so claimed dynasties? Were they really like kings, or were they just
Hmm.
mythical gods? As I suppose you, I don't know. You tell me.
Yeah. Yes. The Turin Papyrus is, of course, very famous. I share your enthusiasm for the museum. In my opinion, is the most beautiful Egyptian museum in the world. Um,
Oh, Cairo Museum, Cairo Museum,
ah,
Cairo,
Yeah,
yes.
no, I think yes, of course. I mean, Egypt is special. I mean, outside Egypt, perhaps.
Outside Egypt, outside Egypt.
Turin is really an amazing place. And actually, the papyrus Turin was one of the first uh, objects used by Champollion also to reconstruct, to help reconstruct the history. It's a king's list, but of course it's not the only one. But it's one of the first ones that he saw, and the reason for that is that. I keep on going back to Champollion because his work has been so fundamental for us. Um, when he had kind of deciphered hieroglyphs, of
Mm-hmm.
course there was still a lot of work to do, but there weren't many big collections in Europe yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the first collections arrived in Turin, he was asked to come there to help unpack for the first time these objects as they arrived. Must have been amazing to be there when all these great objects are being unpacked.
And you being the
And he
only
was one of
expert.
yes, exactly. He was the only one of the only ones in Europe who would be able to read the royal names and therefore date the pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And so he found this papyrus in loads of fragments, and he actually writes to his brother how heartbroken he is when he sees in what bad condition these fragments are. And he's the first one who tries to put it together and tries to decipher the royal names.
Ah,
And he then compares it with some other kings' lists that he already had access to. For example, he had a drawing of the king's list from
Abydos. Mm-hmm.
Abydos from the time of Ramesses II in his temple, which at the time was still in situ. Now it's in the British
Mm-hmm.
Museum.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and then Champollion will later see it in Egypt when it's still in the temple. It's only taken away later. And travelers had already made a copy of those of that list, and he could compare the two. And so this is how scholars after him have been working by comparing many different pieces of kings list. We don't have that many, but we have a few.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we have short kings list of only 8 kings, but it helps if you put all of these together, you can somehow reconstruct um,
Mm-hmm.
the order of the kings, and that of course together with what you know from classical literature and so on, and from other texts. So it's
Manetho.
yeah, it's and also the literature, the contemporary literature that you have from ancient Egypt. So putting all these pieces together, you can somehow reconstruct. But I have to say that we're still debating certain parts of history. There's still articles. I read something the other day where they corrected a mistake in the order of the kings of the 25th dynasty, for example. So there is still a lot of research being done
Mm-hmm.
on lesser known periods, so to say, or even on well known
Mm-hmm.
periods. Um, what concerning the earliest dynasties, the word dynasty is problematic.
Mm-hmm.
We use it again because we follow Manetho.
Manetho.
It's been so accepted by Egyptology that it would be really confusing and disruptive to change it. But for example, we know that Khasegemawi was, well, most likely the father of Djoser, who built
Mm-hmm.
the first step
Mm-hmm.
pyramid in
Mm-hmm.
Saqqara.
Mm-hmm.
Djoser finishes the tomb of his father in Abydos. He seals it. Yet we start a new dynasty with Djoser. He's the first king of the third
Mm-hmm.
dynasty.
Mm-hmm.
There's not really,
Mm-hmm.
well, the reason could be that he starts this new necropolis. He revolutionizes
Mm-hmm.
the architecture of royal tombs. That's all true. But if you think about the dynasty in terms of you know,
You should have
giving
started
the
with
rule
King.
from father to son, then you should not start a new dynasty. So this is already very problematic. But as long as everybody knows this, it's okay. You can
Mm-hmm.
use it as a reference. Um, in my opinion, um, the Egyptian state was unified by Narmer
Mm-hmm.
in the very beginning of, well, actually just before, well, with him, we should start the first dynasty. That's not accepted by everyone. That's still a matter of debate.
Dynasty Zero,
Um,
right? There is Dynasty Zero.
yeah, this zero doesn't exist. Zero is nothing. Um, yeah, so I don't use this term.
Okay.
What we tried, well, again,
Mm-hmm.
it's a matter of discussion.
Mm-hmm.
But I prefer to speak about Dynasty 1 as the first dynasty of the Egyptian history, and everything before we refer to the material culture by Nagada phases.
Mm-hmm.
Nagada. So these predecessors, so to speak, of Narmer, who are buried in the Abydos. They have
Mm-hmm.
tombs. They were
Mm-hmm.
they were people. They were rulers.
King
But
Scorpion.
yes, well, were they rulers of a unified Egypt? Um, Probably not. And even in the time of Narmer, we don't know if Narmer really had control over the entire country. But in his time, we see more evidence also in the north. We can believe that he was the one who founded the city of Memphis as a capital city of Egypt. Um, his tomb is also slightly bigger than his predecessors in the Bible. And so, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of arguments to say Narmer is probably the first king of a unified Egypt. And everything before that was they were rulers, maybe of regions, or that doesn't make them less important. But yeah, we don't really have the evidence unless something changed in the last years that I'm not familiar with. But
Oh. Hmm. Oh. Ilona is gone. Hmm. There is a problem with Ilona connection. Okay. I hope she's back. Yeah, for the audience, we have a slight technical problem. um, Let me see. She must come back. Okay. Okay, you're back.
yes,
Yes. No, because you were gone for a second.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, you too.
okay. But so just to finish the question, so you think when they talk about I don't remember the Shemsu Hor, or those are just gods, right? They just claim that those were not kings, or yeah.
Shamsuhor is could be literally translated as the followers of Horus.
Mm,
It's really difficult to know who they were. You know, those that's going very back in history a long time, and there's a lot of, like in every culture and in every great civilization, there's lots of legends about how all of this came into being. And if
mm,
you look at the material that you have, the material, the material culture and the inscriptions, um, then it seems that
mm,
there is a few predecessors of Narmer in terms of ruling regions.
mm-hmm,
They can be large regions, mostly in Upper Egypt. When you look at the
mm-hmm,
tombs that were constructed in Kab Abydos,
mm-hmm,
and there were probably other rulers in the north,
mm-hmm.
where we have a lot less written material. Um, yeah,
Okay, so we don't have evidence of earlier, like Shensu or real people. We believe that this is a myth, right? It's a mythical.
it's difficult to identify them. Of course, we have a lot of tombs, and a lot of material culture from before Narmer.
Yes.
The question would be, were were they kings of the whole of Egypt, or were they local rulers? There must have been chieftains and local rulers for a long time before the first dynasty, of
Yeah,
course.
but long time, like 500 years, not like 2000.
Uh, Not that we have evidence of,
Is that?
or that we can identify them. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
what do you do with a tomb that has no inscription, that you
Mm-hmm.
cannot identify? I
Yeah.
mean, you have other material culture that can point to elite culture, that can point to social an increased social status,
Mm-hmm.
but that doesn't go back that
Mm-hmm.
far in time, I would
Yeah, I
say.
think the earliest thing I remember I was finding is Nabta Playa, right? Is 7000 BC,
Yes, of course. I mean,
but
that's
it's not Egyptian. Like it's not there's nothing like Egyptian culture there, right?
yeah, it's difficult to say at that time what is defined as Egyptian culture. This is a
Horus, Ra.
Yeah, but that comes later. Yes, that comes later. Yeah, but that's also, now you're talking real prehistory. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
this is almost a different speciality, a different field of study.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So. we don't have writing at that point yet.
Yeah.
And for me, then I start when I can read something.
Sure.
This
If we
is
don't have the
yeah.
writing, then how could we have the Pyrus of Turin saying that those guys back then were called that in that way? Like it's a, I don't know. It's a very confusing topic to me, and
It's a reinterpretation of history. Yeah? I mean, and that's what they
mhm,
always do, and you have to keep that in the back of your mind. For example, if you look at the king's list
mhm,
in the temple of Ramesses II
mhm,
at Abydos,
mhm,
it's also not 100% correct,
mhm, mhm,
even in the time of Ramesses II, where really they should have known.
mhm. But it's
um,
incorrect on purpose.
on purpose,
Yeah.
also, yes.
Yeah.
So this is an interpretation of history. You try to explain something that makes sense in your time.
Mhm,
It was maybe not for Ramesses II. The most important thing of that list was to legitimize his rule, not
mhm,
necessarily to write history.
mhm,
And that's what you see in earlier periods as well. Also in the early dynastic period, the Old Kingdom. It's something that runs through history, that you try to legitimize your rule,
mhm,
and you do that by putting yourself in a long line of rulers.
mhm, mhm,
And so the kings
mhm.
of the first dynasty would have want to do the same. They would have, yeah.
Imagine you
Like,
are born in a civilization in like 2500. Ah, well, if you're born like in the Middle Kingdom, you are basically the first civilization ever. No, but of course, you're not the first civilization ever because there is Asia, right? There is China. This is also rising, right? Or the Hindu Valley civilization. I don't know
mm,
much about
mm.
Asia, but your Egypt was not like the first civilization, right? But pretty much
It's
they
one of the earliest,
yeah,
yeah,
but they
of
believed
that scale, yeah.
they believed. I mean,
Mm.
like the Romans could refer to the Greeks could refer to the Egyptians, but the Egyptians could not refer to anybody.
Yeah. Well, they refer to themselves. I mean, if you
Exactly.
speak
See,
about,
see.
yeah, if you speak about the Middle Kingdom, we have actually quite a bit of literature from the Middle Kingdom where they are talking about predecessors, and
Hmm.
where they, just like we do now, especially when you get older, you think that everything was better in the past. When I was young, this wouldn't happen like this.
Yeah.
So we have this literature from the Middle Kingdom as well. The Middle Kingdom is actually a period where you have an explosion of texts that refer to the past,
Nostalgia.
and so often nostalgia and complaining about, why don't we have these great scribes of the past anymore, and so on. So they were definitely reflecting on their own history.
Okay.
You often read that the ancient Egyptians didn't write history, and this is a bit our perception. Sure, we don't have historiography like we have from
Mm-hmm.
classical sources,
Mm-hmm.
but they were constantly referring back to the past,
Mm-hmm.
in texts, in their iconography,
Mm-hmm.
in the way they portrayed
Yeah.
themselves.
But as far as they knew, they were the first humans.
Yes,
It's
yes,
incredible.
and everything outside Egypt was chaos anyway. So
It's crazy. Imagine that
yeah.
you think that your country will. And by the way, like they don't have the sense of like what is the sense of state, of country, of nation, of all of these words. They didn't exist back then. What for them was Kemet, and Kemet meant the earth, right? Or some what? No.
Well, I think the concept of a nation or is different from what we understand as a nation, but definitely they had a concept of Egypt as a state. It was one unit, but it was more a unit of order, um,
Mm,
that worked
mm,
by the concept of Ma'at, which is order, and the king was responsible for maintaining that order within the borders of Egypt. And these borders were pretty well defined. They
mm-hmm,
changed
mm-hmm,
throughout history, but
mm-hmm,
they were pretty well defined. And we have boundary stela that say everything beyond this point is
mm-hmm.
basically, not Egypt
Desert.
anymore. It's chaos and so on. Um,
It's chaos.
Also, yes,
Yeah.
I mean they had a very, very good idea about, yeah, what Egypt was, what it stood for, what it meant, and
And what was Egypt?
yeah.
What was Egypt for Egyptians? what was this Kemet for
Well,
them?
it was this Kemet is referring to the fertile black land that is more or less referring to the Nile inundation. When the Nile inundation retrieves, it leaves this slip behind and it impregnates the ground, and that's kind of what is the original meaning of this word that they refer to. Um, but then this becomes a concept of a country that works, that is depending on the agricultural surplus, that is a fertile land where things grow, where you can live, which gives life. The Nile is the life-giving factor. Um, that constellation of these different elements um, is something that for them was Egypt. Even the desert, which for us now is within the borders of Egypt, would for them already not been their normal habitat anymore. This is already a little bit
Desert,
outside.
desert, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's where the deceased live. That's where maybe you go to the edge of the desert to visit your deceased family members, but you really don't go beyond unless you're part of a military expedition or something. So I mean, we also have to make a distinction, of course, between the kings and the normal people living, who there is a huge difference between what occupied their minds and what they considered as their yeah their world. The worldview of a farmer would have been very different from the
And
pharaoh's
imagine,
worldview.
imagine these guys when somebody with a different color of skin come over, it's like the aliens. For them, it's like the aliens. It's like, who are these guys?
Yeah, I don't know.
From
I mean,
Nubia.
I think it depends where they come from and in what capacity. Definitely there was a lot of interaction with Nubians from very early on in
Okay.
Egyptian history. They had a role in society. They later become mercenaries in the Egyptian army. Um, we have very good evidence of that already from the first intermediate period, the Middle Kingdom, where Nubians are known to be very good archers, and so they are used by the Egyptians. The Egyptians also went into Nubia, of course, sometimes peacefully, sometimes less peacefully, but most of the time, these settlements south of Egypt were inhabited by Egyptians and Nubians, often living together, creating new communities. So I don't think they were aliens,
No, but I mean,
but
I exaggerate.
I don't think they thought that they were aliens. But so I think sometimes we like to think about Egypt as an isolated country, and I don't think it was like that. Egypt had a lot of contacts with also cultures in the Mediterranean, the northeast into the what we refer to as the Levant, present day Middle East, and so they were well aware that people were living there.
But even in the
Um,
even in the old kingdom.
yes, there were
Okay.
there were
Okay.
there was a lot of I wouldn't say that there were many
Interaction.
foreigners living in, but there was always contact, and foreigners come into Egypt throughout Egyptian history, and travelers, merchants,
Yeah.
yeah, as I said, part of the army, translators. We would have had you know um, scribes at the court who were familiar with foreign languages in order to maintain diplomatic correspondence. We have a lot of diplomatic correspondence, so Egypt is not isolated. It's just a way of presenting the world, how you think the world is ideal, and then everything else out there is something else. And
Chaos.
sometimes it's referred to chaos, and sometimes they trade with them, they exchange goods with them. Egyptians were very flexible.
I love the whole. I mean, you can keep going for 3 hours. I just. uh, I have other couple of questions. Maybe we are about 50 minutes, so this is really
Yes, I see.
time is really flying. And so actually, let me do a little promotion. If you guys would like to subscribe to the channel, go ahead. The time is now because 90% of the people that watch the videos don't subscribe. So please do. Uh, just a little promotion. Museums. So, what's but we already talked about what's behind the scenes in a little bit. Ah, okay. This is the topic. Are you ready? Repatriation of artifacts.
I
So, I tell you first my opinion, and then you tell me your opinion.
uh
I believe that the bust of Nefertiti deserves to be in the Egyptian Museum of Berlin. And I argument why, and then you tell me why, and then you tell me your opinion. Um, I think the bust. I mean, I don't know the whole story, but the I tend to believe that, of course, there were times in the 1800s where the Europeans came to Egypt with the purpose of make money out of the artifacts, for sure. Okay, but there is also a component of homage. Let's say they were coming then, coming back, coming to Egypt, and bringing some of the goods of the good artifacts as a sort of showing to Europeans how good Egyptian culture was back then, comparing to the Greek one that we just believe was the only one that was good back in the ancient times. So there is a component of stealing and make money, but there is also a component of respect of that culture. And by having the bust of Nefertiti in the Egyptian Museum of Berlin, we are first sure that it gets all the best resources for preservation, and we are sure that it has a great platform to be showcased in an international, famous, and respected institution, which unfortunately Cairo Museum is not. So to conclude my thoughts, and then you tell me what you think. I think we should not repatriate because this is obviously is a European point of view, but there are many obelisks that are in Rome, and now um, they are part of the city of Rome. They make the history of Rome, and in a way, the bust of Nefertiti is making the history of Europe in its own little way. So it's, to
mhm.
me, these things are global. To me, these things are human, are not, otherwise I will claim the Mona Lisa to the French now and bring it back to Florence. But would you bring back to Florence or Milan or Rome? Where would you put
Mm.
it? Where does it really belong? Because it was done by Leonardo, but Leonardo was from Florence, but then he used to live in Milan and then Rome. Like, so I don't know. You tell me.
Yeah, it's a very complex story, and I think it's important to look at every object in its own right. So the story of Nefertiti is very different from the story of the Rosetta Stone, for example. And I think, I mean, I agree with your point that if we start doing that, I mean, I'm Flemish. I can also claim back all the Flemish primitives that are dispersed around the world. However, I am very happy that people in North America can see Flemish primitives um, and to look at these pieces of art and learn something about our culture.
Yeah,
And I think most Egyptians think like this as
yeah.
well. I think whenever we have Egyptian colleagues over, here it was the same at the British Museum. Most of them, I say most of them, are very proud, in fact, of their culture being presented and being visited by many people in Europe who would otherwise perhaps not go to Egypt. I mean, in terms of, I mean, making money, this is always a little bit, I mean, abstract. I think tourism is the first source of income for Egypt, and I think um, many people go to Egypt because they've been to a museum before, and they've seen of or they've learned about ancient Egypt, and then they go to Egypt. So for
Mm-hmm.
me,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's so many different aspects of the story. One very important one is that for me, the object in a museum is not an end point. It's not an end journey of this object or of the way visitors engage with these objects. It's often a starting point for
Mm-hmm.
learning, for traveling, for going
Mm-hmm.
to Egypt in the end. Um, and it's also shouldn't be, I mean, you can give your opinion, I can give your opinion. For me, these objects are bigger than us and are part of, as you said, world heritage. And I find it, if you look at history and you look at how we think about these discussions, where objects should be, should they go back, should they not go back, I worry a little bit that if you follow trends and you start giving things back, maybe in 10 years or like in 50 years, we will think differently and we have done something irreparable.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I wouldn't feel confident deciding on an issue like this that I think that is much bigger than me. I'm a small person that maybe if I'm lucky I live 80 years. Nefertiti will still be there in 200 years. So often these discussions are also a little bit hijacked by political agendas. Um, and that is a bit worrying, I think. The
Mm-hmm.
first and foremost um, argument should be the preservation. And that is not to say, of course, Egypt is building lots of new museums. They have fantastic um, conservation labs. It's not like they can't take care of it. They have a lot of, resources for the moment, but they also have a lot of material to take care of. And if you talk with our Egyptian colleagues, and most of our museums have excellent relationships with the Ministry of Antiquities, um, they are already a little bit overwhelmed with all the things that they have to manage.
Mm-hmm.
And I think most of my colleagues are really not waiting for collections from Europe to come back and to just very
Mm-hmm.
practically.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, they've just opened the Grand Egyptian Museum, which has fantastic laboratories with lots of people working there that have great expertise.
Mm-hmm.
And they filled this entire museum with objects that were sitting in storerooms and in other museums. So the situation is different from for other countries or cultures where certain contexts were looted by European um, travelers or
Mm-hmm.
archaeologists that cannot be replaced, or that is just so unique
Mm-hmm.
that there's really something missing in that country. I wouldn't say that that's the case for
Mm-hmm.
Egypt. So
Mm-hmm.
we really have to ask ourselves every time again, for each individual story of each
Mm-hmm.
individual objects, why we are doing this
Mm-hmm.
and what would be the benefit for the world, for Egypt,
Mm-hmm.
for the object, and so on. And and so I mean, I would never even we would never decide on this. Also, I mean, the decision for repatriation goes back on a very, very high level
Mm-hmm.
in our institutions.
Well, it's
So
the
we are very
ministry.
lucky.
Is the Ministry of Culture in this case will be the Minister of Culture of Germany.
I think in this case, yeah, I was a bit more familiar with the situation in the UK because I've only arrived here last year, and in the UK, in the British Museum, I was responsible for the Rosetta Stone. Here, I am not responsible for Nefertiti. So in a way, I'm happy that I don't have to ever have to take that decision. It would be
Mm-hmm.
very difficult, but I think it's really important that we have Egyptian culture represented in as many countries as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you look at what is happening in world politics, I mean, people
Mm-hmm.
need to learn about other cultures. There is
Mm-hmm.
this extreme
Mm-hmm.
fear for the other, and fear for anything that is foreign, that I think
Yeah.
the only way we can battle this on a non-political level is through our museums.
Uh,
And so the discussion is a little bit, and I'm talking about objects that came to us in a legal way. I mean, according to the laws of the time. Of course, if something is looted, if you really have evidence that something is looted, and this happens regularly as well,
mm-hmm.
then that's a whole different story. We should
Mm-hmm.
not encourage that. And if we can do something now, we should do it.
Mm-hmm. But they are the
Um,
first to loot themselves, right? just
well,
in Egypt.
I mean, it depends on how you look at it. If there was a really Maria Golia wrote a really beautiful book recently. It's directed to the general public. That is about the history of looting, um, and people have been doing it all the time, and
Yeah.
it's the ancient Egyptians would loot their own sites and reappropriate material. It's just so human, isn't it? And especially with ancient Egypt, so many people want to have a piece of the culture, and locally people hope to improve their lives by.
Yeah, sometimes, guys, sometimes the connection jumps. She will be back soon. I don't know why today. My connection is good, eh? It's strangely good, but let's see. She will be back soon. Give me like a couple of seconds. Jim Tripman, thank you for coming. Greg Murrell, thank you for coming, guys. Appreciate. I hope you're enjoying the conversation. Ilona,
The
here.
times were different.
Here we go back,
Yeah.
Ilona. Sorry, you
Yeah.
jumped again. Yeah, no, if you want to repeat the last 1 minute sentence, we lost it.
What did I say?
Forgot.
I was
The
just,
looting, the
I
looting.
guess I was just, yeah, I mean, we, we are in communication all the time with our colleagues in Egypt, who want to stop looting and who want to identify pieces who are in circulation that shouldn't be in circulation. And so there is an enormous international collaboration on making sure that objects that left the country illegally return, and that's correct. And already that is a lot of work, rather than going back to our collections. I think we have to just really focus on exactly the preservation, and also to share our collections, and to so that we are transparent about how things to and where things are, and that this the situation is to understand the history of elections.
Uh, okay, so Ilona, the whole. Let me see if it's working. You still here? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, sometimes the camera freeze. Look, we are about 1 hour, so maybe we can just the last question, and then we wrap it up, maybe. And because
Yeah.
I don't want to loot too much of your time. And so, if you were to pitch a movie to Hollywood about Egypt, what would the storyline be?
I mean, movies on discoveries is always very exciting. But I mean, there's so many interesting ancient stories that would benefit from a Hollywood movie. I mean, you can, and it would probably have to involve a pharaoh doing something silly, um, going on war or something, with big battlefields in the background. Ramesses II on his chariot charging into a foreign country. And then also the stories around that. We have lots of stories from individual people that were living at the court, or that had something to do with the entourage of the king. We have stories of kings being assassinated. One very beautiful story is where a king appears to his son in a dream and tells his son, who's the future king, that this is a story around was written, or the evidence, the text we have date to around 2000 BC. And in this
Wow.
dream, the father tells his son that he really has to be careful with the people around him, that he cannot trust anyone, because he was assassinated by someone very close to him, that he would have never expected it from this person. He doesn't identify the person, but um, it's a story that has been passed on, um, also for generations in Egypt, in ancient Egypt. So in ancient Egypt, it was a popular story. Um, so that would be, I think you could do a good movie on that. There is a lot of story material and storytelling in ancient Egyptian literature.
Yeah, I would like to buy a book about those stories. I don't have. I have like myth and gods, but I don't have the stories of ancient. I will buy. I am definitely curious.
Yeah.
I will do a trilogy. I will do a trilogy based on the reconquering of the north and the born of the new kingdom.
Yeah.
So what was the name of the guy? I don't remember. So from Thebes, going up with the boats and trying to get the Hyksos. I mean,
Ah,
I know it's
yes.
a little bit of a war movie. I know.
During the beginning of the beginning of the New Kingdom,
Yes.
you have a similar situation in the beginning of the Middle Kingdom. But the nice thing about the beginning of the New Kingdom, so this is probably
Yes.
Kamosi and
Yes.
Ahmosi of
Yes.
the
That's why the trilogy is one each,
yes.
one
And
movie
then
each.
you also have these foreign rulers that you can bring in, and there is this story that um, we always think about the second intermediate period as the Hyksos who came in
Hmm.
from the north and
Hmm.
conquered
Hmm.
Egypt, but the Nubians played an important role as well and probably conquered large parts of Upper Egypt, or at least caused some troubles. I worked on a text myself in a tomb at El Kap. This is a site south of Luxor, um, and this text we discovered was completely unknown. That said that the town and the enclosure wall and the temple were attacked by Nubians during the second intermediate period. And there are even some scholars who suggest that they made a deal with the
With the
Hyksos
Hyksos,
to conquer Egypt, to
they were
divide Egypt
squeezed,
amongst themselves. Yes, so that would be a very good historical drama.
right?
Yes,
Let's not choose
that
Ridley
nobody thought about
Scott.
that yet.
Guy, come on! For me, a trilogy, like
Yes.
the Lord of the Kings, the Lord of the Kings. Sorry, Lord of the Rings. Ilona, I don't wanna steal too much of your time. Thank you for coming. I will be here for 2 more hours. This conversation was really good, and you were really kind, and I mean, very.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I will probably end the stream here unless there are some questions from the. No, there are no questions from the chat. Thank you all for coming. I will end the stream here, and yeah, I mean, we talk a little bit.